This is a Heart and Hand production.
Good evening and welcome back to Tactics Talk. I am your host, Adam Thornton, and as always, I'm joined by Ali Bain. Ali, how's things?
All good, thanks, mate. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you on. Okay, so we've been doing a couple of little videos, bite size, etc. This one is going to be a little bit different. In the attacking options thread on Patreon, the show that we did on Rangers attacking options, Scott Watson asked us to look at a thread which I had retweeted on Twitter, which has now been deleted by an account called Talking Tactics. And this is about reverse engineering. So we always talk about a team's tactical approach, and we always talk about what they do, how they build up play, obviously starting with the keeper, whether they go long, whether they go to the fullbacks, whether they build through the lines centrally. But he sort of flipped it on its head, and I found it really interesting. And he sort of said, right, well, let's turn it around and what do we want to do? Well, we want to score goals. Okay, who scores the goals? And take it from there and then kind of work back the way, almost like reverse engineering, a jigsaw puzzle, if you like. So we thought we'd give that a go. We thought we'd do it for Gerrard first. And the reason for that is a lot of Michael Beale's principles now are the principles that he put in a couple of years ago. So we want to do this as a bit of a before, during and after type thing. So we want to show a bit of evolution here. Obviously with Michael Beale, I think we're a little bit too soon. There's a little bit too many unknowns to know exactly how he's going to play this year coming up. But maybe towards Christmas time, we can have a look at that and see where the evolution has came from. So we're going to do that here. In order to do this, I think it probably makes sense to talk about a goal, or at least a type of goal that Rangers score, to give you guys an idea of exactly what we're trying to do, what we're trying to illustrate. So the goals that we're going to use, or the moves, I guess, that we're going to use to kind of nicely illustrate this. One of them is Morelos' goal against Porto. I have this handy PDF, which may or may not be from my book, Gerrard's Blueprint, if anybody still hasn't bought it and would like to buy it. But this shows Alfredo Morelos' goal away in the Estadio de Dragao in October 2019. Helander playing the ball into Kent, out to Barisic and rolling the ball into Morelos. So this is a good example of how we built up play over the couple of years under Gerrard up to winning the league. There's a couple of other examples in there as well, such as the Tavernier's goal against Galatasaray, even maybe parts of Tavernier's goal against Borussia Dortmund the year after under a different manager. So gives you an idea of what we are trying to do. So Ali, first of all, in terms of this, let's start from the top then. So the easy answer here, I guess, particularly if we're focusing on this period from, if you like, summer 2019 until we win the league, a season and a half later or 2 years later. First question, who scores the goals is fairly obvious, but just give us it anyway.
It was predominantly Morelos. This is obviously a period of time where, if we think back to this is when he was probably at his best, not only just in form, but his best in terms of pulling defences apart, really leading the line as to hitting the ball directly into him. It wasn't quite at the stage of him dropping back into midfield to get the ball and everyone wondering why the guy's 40 yards from the goal he used to stand near. Nor really is he a true penalty box striker either. He's a bit of both in this period, right? And
yep.
I think looking back at this team and this performance in particular, it was such an impressive performance from him, and probably leads to some of the frustration we feel today, right? Of this is really the height of what he was capable of.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're both on record as saying that it was nice to have that sort of drop in deep Morelos, but I think certainly for me, this 6-month period that we're in right now of Porto and all the goals in Europe and the goals in the league, for me, that was peak Morelos in terms of that, what I wanted him to be. You could argue dropping deep made us a better team and we end up winning the league, and that's absolutely fine. But as an individual, I think there's no debate for me that that's where he was there. Okay, so we're going to use tactical pad a little bit again, just to sort of remind us of various things. When Ali's sort of talking through these pieces, I'll be moving the players about just so that we get a bit more of an indication of what we're talking about, and hopefully it adds it to life. If you're just listening on audio, hopefully you'll still be able to follow it. Okay, so undeniably then, Morelos is the goal scorer. Looking at the midfield three, Ali, they had their uses. I think we're all pretty clear on that, particularly in these type of games. But and then I guess I'm still surprised looking back that Brandon Barker plays in this game. To be honest, is what it is. The next thing we want to talk about then is who scores the goals. We know it's not coming from the centre midfield. We want to talk about who creates the goals. We know it's not coming from the middle of the park here with those three centre mids. So in terms of providing the chances in this evolution of the Rangers team, who was it, or what areas of the pitch did it come from?
So I think predominantly, if we look at the board there, and obviously the player in particular, a lot of the deliveries came from was Barisic, right? I guess the next piece of this and how this links him and Morelos is an interesting one. So if we look at the board real quick, and if you want to just move Barisic up a wee bit for me, mate. The easy part here to say is, well, there's deliveries from deep, right? It's crosses from wide areas, and that's cool. That we sort of get that, we understand it. I think what we need to look at though here is Morelos' positioning. Now, obviously, where he finished in this particular move was in a back post area. Yeah. But if you just pull Morelos just to the opposite side of the number 4 for me, if you look at that distance now between the ball and where Morelos is, there's a lot of information the defence need to pick up, or need to take in rather, in order to pick him up properly. So by living in the shadows almost of that space behind the number 4, and then making a run either in between the number 4 and number 5, or just making a run to the back post, you're not only challenging the defender's ability to track runs, head the ball, but you're also making them say, well, are we going to stay high and try and play offside here to attack this cross early? Therefore, this now allows space for Morelos to run in behind. So all of this, the supply piece into the box clearly is only capable, or only able to happen because Barisic is a wonderful delivery. But if Morelos' movement's poor here and he doesn't manage that space inside the box well, then as we've saw this season, Barisic could have the best cross in the league. The movement's not there, and we're not attacking spaces, and we're not opening up the spaces to attack, then all of that sort of becomes redundant, really, right?
Absolutely. And I think this is something that shows that change in Morelos. I don't think he would make these runs, make these moves. You can argue whether that's a physical thing, whether he'd be unable to do this piece now. But I just don't think he could occupy the centre halves in this specific way that we're talking about. Back to goal and things, absolutely. But just that movement, that outside to in, if you like, and eventually coming to the back post. It's a really difficult one to defend, this, isn't it? It's easy to say they get caught out in the centre halves get caught out. But you mentioned all those things that they're trying to do. They're also running back the way, I guess, for most of that as well, whereas Morelos is on the front foot. So it's a really difficult thing to keep control of. And I think you're spot on. We'll come on to the delivery piece of it and how we sort of create that space there. But the actual movement of Morelos to make that chance and still have the time and awareness to take the touch before he scores the goal, I think is huge, because you would expect that, even from Morelos, you would expect that to be a first-time finish. Okay, so next question that we've got there then is how we create the space for Barisic. Now, we always talk about Barisic. We know he's not Tavernier on the other side. We know he's not going to pick up the ball from deep and dribble. He's not going to come inside. He's not even really going to play lots of 1-2s to try and create the space and to move people about. He very much was uninvolved under Gerrard in the defensive third or in build-up play. What we tried to do was to get him into that final third. So if we continue this theme and it's Barisic we're talking about, or a left-sided fullback, how did we then manage to create the space for him in games to allow him to utilise that delivery?
Well, I guess this really here is the hardest part, right? This is the hardest part to create. The sort of sleight of hand where you're pulling the opposition defenders away from where we want the ball to get to, which is obviously Barisic's feet. but more importantly, you want to be able to put him in a situation where he's able to deliver a cross either unopposed or as close to unopposed as possible, right? Now, that's okay if you're up against a team, maybe a first or second division team in the cup, where they're going to make maybe poor decisions and over jump and go press elsewhere because maybe they're a little bit too active. This is one of the best teams in Europe we're talking about here in Porto at the time. So, trying to create space for Barisic is going to take a lot of movements, a lot of rotations. And I guess that sort of, ability to work together as a team, it takes time. This isn't just you go stand here, you go stand their job. This is going to be something they've clearly worked on as a pattern a lot this particular season, obviously, in order to get to where they got to here. So the movements that we looked at was Kent, first of all, coming off the sidelines and into an interior position, and then Glenn Kamara's movement from this sort of left central position, dropping into either a left back position or even at times dropping into almost like a centre back position, pulling and drawing pressure away from the player who would have picked up Barisic, essentially. Trying to that sleight of hand, that little movement that occupies Porto's players to think in front of the ball rather than the players moving in behind them.
And that's the end point there, but ultimately we need to think about how we build out play. So we're not. This is almost off the ball stuff. We're then trying to get these things to work on the left hand side, but in order to trick the opposition, I'm not sure what word we would use there, but in order to make the opposition think we're doing something else before we're able to get the ball over that side with them in lots of space, how would we go about doing that? How would we attract the opposition to other areas of the park to allow us that space, to allow Kent and Kamara to be dragging other players out of position?
Well, I think the first one is obviously the easy ones from goal kicks, right? Or I guess a restart or a rest defence. Ball turns over, they play the big long ball, starts back with our goalkeeper. A lot of the initial entries would go through the right-hand side. So obviously Goldson pulling into wide areas, Tavernier really stretching high up the field. So again, making that build out space really big. So Porto countering that by drawing players across, right? So now you've then got the next layer of this is to midfield players. So whether it's Jack, whether it's Barker dropping in, whether it's Davis as the, I guess, sort of holding midfielder, sort of pseudo centre back at times dropping in, essentially encouraging Porto to come across to the ball side, which in this case is our right hand side and their left hand side.
So that then, I'm illustrating this on here, that will then drag us over into our side. We've seen this so many times. We've had complaints, I guess, or wonderings why Ryan Jack is coming into this area of the park and why we're playing sort of 5-yard passes without anything. I guess more of that, this would then speak to this, wouldn't it? Where we're trying to drag players over into here. It might seem like we don't have an option to build play. However, if we're dragging over their centre mids and we're sort of taking this attention away from these guys on this side, then it's probably doing something that maybe we wouldn't have initially thought. So with that, then we've got the ball on the right hand side. We've sort of drawn the opposition over, if you like, and Connor Goldson's on the ball. In terms of us getting, whether Goldson decides to use that big diagonal that we've seen in those couple of years is absolutely one way to get it over there. But if we decide to go maybe less risky, and we want to create down this right hand side, how would we go about doing that?
Well, to your point there about the passes into Jack, a lot of those are pressing triggers, right? It's that almost like straight pass forward, like a vertical pass with someone that has their back to play. We used to see this a lot, even going back to the very, very early days of, Candace coming on the inside and Tavernier overlapping. It was to draw pressure away, pull a full back out. So Jack does a good job of this. Barker in this particular game does a good job of this. But ultimately what we're trying to do here is pull players out of position, horizontally and vertically. So like we said, vertically they come and step out. Horizontally we have them scooch across to our right-hand side. But more importantly, the trigger here is to get the ball to Helander, right? And how they do that is either a forward pass and then a switch, or if they can go in that first line into Jack, for example, it's then a switch across into Davis, who can then play it to the opposite side.
Cool. Okay. So in terms of that switch then that we talk about, what initiates the switch? Is that pressing triggers? Is that an intention from Rangers? Is that based on the opposition? Is it all of the above? Is there anything in particular that you think is the main thing there?
I think the first one is obviously the opposition. So if you've got in this game here, if you think back, there was a very, very aggressive press from the number 10 would step forwards. The two sort of holding midfielders as well would really jump high. So there's no one really screening their back line, really. So that first pass into, let's say, a Barker position there is one where, again, we're trying to force them to squeeze up the lines high. So once we then do go wide, so let's say in this case here it's Tavernier into wide areas, that the next pass we can play is in behind the opposition's back line. It's a penetrative ball that exposes that space. So the first thing is, we're trying to play short to have them squeeze up. As we mentioned there about the switching play, obviously then you're looking for one of their attackers. So in this case here, it's the number 10 next to Helander, for him to go somewhere else, right? So whether that's dropping onto Davis, whether that's coming across to go press Goldson as the number 9s went somewhere else. Do you know what I mean? It's trying to overload, underload is the sort of technical term of you're trying to overload on one side to create an underload on another, where there's either bigger spaces or a numerical advantage that we can quickly play the ball across to. Now, knowing that Goldson's probably a better all-round footballer than Helander, I don't think this is a shock as to, right, we want to probably go to the right side anyway. But at the same time, Helander's got a good enough touch that if you're firing a ball across to him from 20, 30 yards, he's got enough in him that he can control it first time without it being worrying about us turning the ball over in that defensive third as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. And obviously with this goal then, if we use that as a specific example here, assuming we did manage to get Helander on the ball, we managed to offload Helander's man in this scenario. When Helander gets this ball, you're right, you mentioned Goldson's probably thinking is, I'm going to play a big diagonal, or I'm going to try and build down this side. We've spoke about Helander maybe doesn't have that big diagonal in him. It's maybe not the right move to give the ball to Barisic here and try and get him to take on a man in the way that Tavernier would do, because it's not his move. So what is he aiming to do then when he gets on this ball? The pass that he makes, is that the obvious one, which is obviously the sort of line-breaking pass through to Ryan Kent?
I think so. And obviously in this particular scenario, the underload in Porto's sense is that they can't now press the ball, right? They've committed too many people to our right-hand side, so there's no one to initially press the ball. Therefore, they're now defending the wrong way around. They're chasing backwards, right? So you've got enough numbers to match us on our side, but the initial ball entry is where there's a lack of pressure. So if that's the case, typically you tell footballers, if there's no pressure on the ball, to try and play centrally rather than go wide and give them the advantage of using the sideline. So that initial pass goes into Kent. And really, to be honest, mate, that this is where the goal was made for me. Yeah. It's that touch that Kent plays first time round the corner. Because he could have taken the ball in, the centre-back gets tight to him, doesn't let him spin, right, maybe loses the ball, and then obviously the whole move breaks down now. But it's that initial, I think it's outside of his right foot, where he sort of flips it around the corner to Barisic. It's just absolutely world class. And again, that speaks to the bigger group tactics are important, clearly. The strategy and the plan's important. But if the individual quality isn't there, then again, this doesn't happen, you know.
No, I think you're right. I think that first touch through to Barisic making that run again, to be fair, maybe not something that we see. It tends to be him arriving in a kind of very obvious way, but that sort of run and that gamble that he makes is maybe not something that we've seen enough of. Okay, so Helander then aiming as the centre back to sort of play those penetrative passes through. I think those are the passes that, for me, I think we should have, and I would have liked to see more of with Ben Davies. I think he's definitely got that much more in his locker than Philip Helander had, albeit he can do it as well. So that's been a bit of a disappointment for me, I guess, that we've never been able to really utilise that. Obviously, with a new centre-back potentially coming in, Ali, in terms of what we're looking for there as a partner to Goldson, is it basically a fit enable Philip Helander, a couple of years younger than he is just now? Or is there more in there when you marry up the need for us to have someone who can make these passes, but also be a centre-back who is positionally aware, strong in a tackle, physical, all those sort of things? Is it just a younger Helander, or is there something else you think we might need in there?
In terms of on-the-ball quality, obviously, one of the things I think Helander doesn't get the credit for, because we didn't see it enough, was his ability to dribble the ball at the back. He was a really good ball carrier, probably better than Goldson in that regard. So a bit of a different sort of skill set. So having someone that can do that on that side, I think, is going to be important. More so, again, just to give you that balance, right? You'd figure on the right-hand side in this team, Tavernier's always going to be someone that's going to draw pressure anyway. On the opposite side, maybe not so much. Like if it's Redvan at left back, Frigate or Barisic, there's probably going to be less people marking him, so there's maybe more onus on the left centre back to be able to carry the ball and play entry passes. Obviously, going back to this particular clip and that quality to play the first time pass, I mentioned obviously individual quality of Kent to play it around the corner, but all the pace is on the ball from Helander, right? So if that pass isn't hit correctly, and we're sort of just chipping a ball forward, that's not really doing anything. So for sure, I'd like to have a left centre back that can hit those passes. But again, to your point about Golson's diagonal, it's always good to have that on the left-hand side as well. It's always good to be able to play a direct pass, especially if in Europe we're probably going to be more of a team that's sitting deep and counter-attacking.
Absolutely. I'm fairly sure that the Helander pass itself was also first time. And I think if I'm remembering it correctly, I'm thinking the ball comes across his body. Mm-hmm. So he's not only is he trying to time it when a ball's coming across and you're looking at players coming to pressure you and things as well, but to get that first time accurate into Kent with the pace on it that allows Kent to make that, I think was huge. It is risky. We're not in a very, very strong defensive shape in this move, despite how strong we were defensively on the night. We're 1-0 down. It's just before half time. It's a pretty risky pass to make. I know that sounds silly, but it is quite risky. So in that, then thinking about it in a kind of defensive out of possession way, if that pass isn't made, or if the pass is made and doesn't get through to Kent, or Kent gets dispossessed, as is quite likely given where he is on the pitch, how would we win the ball back there? Because we're going to be in a high danger situation.
So the phrase counter pressure is one that, again, it's a technical term, it's a coaching term, you hear a lot. And essentially what it means is to press the ball to prevent a counter attack happening, right? So if we show in the shot here, Kent with the ball at his feet, obviously the good thing about how Gerrard and Beale's taking this on is that they're very structure driven coaches. They're not right, lads, you go figure it out and have players running everywhere. Therefore, there's huge big spaces all the time. They're very detail orientated. We spoke last podcast about Beale loves this phrase about getting players close together, right? So in possession, it helps, but out of possession, it also helps to quickly be able to press the ball. So if the ball rolls away from Kent in this instance, we've got Kamara can jump on the ball. Kent can recover press. Davis can go immediately go press. Goldson and Helander can squeeze the back line up. So there's this sort of collective responsibility as it relates to turnovers, that we have this collective idea that we're all going to work together to go press the ball and win it back again. Where it differs slightly from, like, so for example, the sort of famed gegenpress that you hear Jurgen Klopp talk about. If the ball ends up over at the opposition's left back and Klopp's set up, Ryan Kent would literally follow the ball the entire way. He would press it until he literally couldn't stand up anymore. And the rest of the team would sort of morph its way around, right? Thankfully for us, we're a little bit more sort of conservative in that it seems to tend to be the closest player to the ball within a couple of seconds of turnover, and then everyone just sort of work to prevent forward passes. So there is a structure and an idea in possession, but that also needs to lend itself to how we're going to defend when it turns over.
And I think that's where Kamara and Jack wide central midfielders was really useful for us, wasn't it? Because we can see from this still here, it's maybe not exactly the positions that the players were in, but both fullbacks are up, they're aggressive, they're trying to get on the ball. So having that sort of safety blanket behind them was huge for us. Okay, so hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit of an illustration here about Rangers tactics at that point in time. Like I said, this is just something we're trying out. I think a reverse engineering thing is quite useful. Think about who's scoring your goals. Think about who is going to be the main creator within the team. And then think about how we get the ball to them. And it maybe it certainly gave me a bit more of an understanding of how we look to attack rather than just Barisic crosses the ball in. He does cross the ball in, but who's making the space to allow him to cross the ball in? What happens to allow them to have the space? And with other teams that we come to, whether it's Gio's team, whether it's Bill's team in 6 months' time, whether it's other ones we go back and look at, there'll be different build patterns, Ali, won't there? There'll be teams that like to keep the ball deep and maybe build up as a three. There'll be teams that want to have two sort of holding double pivots, if you like, and build through that way. There's lots of different ways to do it, isn't it? We're not necessarily saying this is the tactic the Rangers scored every single goal with. It's just here's an example of how Rangers scored this goal and how the players functioned within that.
Absolutely. And again, game state's a big thing. If we're losing, right, you're going to counter-attack differently than if you're winning 2-0. If it's against a big team who you expect are going to put a lot of numbers forward, in this shot here, it's a sort of 5-5 split, right? We're wider at the front and we're narrower at the back. Whereas it might be that in a game where you're protecting a lead, it's the opposite way around, right? You're wider at the back because you're trying to sort of condense the spaces with more numbers. So I think definitely the strategy of the game state sort of plays into that. But I also think as well, even as we've saw this year, with our games at Ibrox or whether away from home, I think back to a game played at Easter Road where we're counter-attacking it in lots of space. Yeah. Again, that's not going to be there at Ibrox, right? So you're going to have to counter differently and maybe restart play a wee bit differently. Yeah. So these are all the sort of fun parts. And when you brought this to me and showed us it, it's interesting because again, you and I were chatting about this. My thought's always been the other way around, right? How do we start the play and sort of move it forward? So going from a position of how are we going to score, I definitely think it's a sort of cool way to look at it and sort of give you your mind's eye sort of view, I guess, as to how play breaks down.
Yeah, I think we were both maybe reluctant to look at Gio in terms of of this, but I actually think it would be quite useful because I guess at various points, because he's got the transfer window right in the middle where a good number of players come in, it'd be interesting to see because who scores the goals? Well, Čolak, I guess, but then also Morelos. So we can maybe dive into what was the most obvious way that we tried to build. We obviously seen him using Barisic kind of a little bit deeper in terms of the build-up play, and that maybe changed the role of the central midfielders, and he went back to using wingers, etc. as well. So it's nice just to give a little bit of a snapshot of what they are by asking those questions and getting those answers. So we'll hopefully get that one out in a couple of weeks. And then, like I said, I don't know if there's much merit in looking at the 6 months of Michael Beale. I think it's probably best to maybe wait a little while, see how the window settles down, see if anything changes dramatically. If it doesn't change dramatically by the autumn or early winter in terms of the tactics, then we'll put one out with what we know at that point in time. But yeah, I think it's an interesting one to look at. Ali, thank you very much. That was really good to go through.
Appreciate it, mate. Thanks a lot.
And once again, thank you all for listening or watching. Thanks again to Scott Watson for the idea. I think there was another request for set pieces, having a look at Rangers' improvement in set pieces under Michael Beale. So we'll get that one out in a couple of weeks as well. As always, if there's anything else you want us to cover, then please let us know in the comments. Thank you.
That was a Heart and Hand production.